Welcome back to my channel. It's your everydayness, Abby. So today we are continuing our series on the brain and its relation to mental disorders. In our previous discussion or video, we learned about the cerebrum. We got to know about its parts, its functions, and then we also learned that it has two hemispheres. That is the right and the left hemispheres. We also learned that these hemispheres are further divided into lobes. So today we'll be talking about the lobes. We'll know their positions and also their functions. Please kindly visit the previous video so that you get deeper understanding into what we are talking about. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and also share. So the hemisphere is divided into four lobes. So these lobes are the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and lastly the occipital lobe. So we'll begin with the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is the front part of the hemisphere or the front part of the cerebrum. So the frontal lobe is responsible for voluntary movement. All our voluntary movement is by the frontal lobe. It's also responsible for motor activities and it is also responsible for movements that permit speaking. So right now that I'm speaking, the movement that is permitting me to speak is the work of the frontal lobe, and it is also responsible for emotional experiences through an interconnection with the limbic system. So, the limbic system, simply put, is described as the center for strong emotion. That is where our strong emotions comes from. That is from the limbic system. So, the limbic system, together with the frontal lobe, helps us to bring forth certain emotions, and these emotions are fear, aggression, depression, rage, euphoria, that is overexcitedness. We have irritability and apathy. So when someone has a mental condition and the frontal lobe is affected, that means the control of these emotions becomes problematic. So the person will either be depressive, or the person will be aggressive, or the person will show forth a behavior, maybe overexcitedness. So depending on the part of the brain that is affected, it would show the functions that will be affected also in that behavior. And with regards to the frontal lobes, it means that these emotions will be affected. So, still on the frontal lobe, it is also involved in thinking and perceptual interpretation of information. So, the frontal lobe ensures that perception simply is the ability to become aware of something in the environment through your senses. So, to be able to perceive something that is in your environment through your senses. So, the perception, that is the perception in short. So the frontal lobes helps in thinking and also perceptual interpretation of information. So the second thing to consider is the parietal lobe. So the parietal lobe is the upper middle part of the cerebrum. The upper middle part of the cerebrum or the hemisphere. And the parietal lobe, this is where somatosensory input occurs. So this is where somatosensory input occurs. And then somatosensory input is the part of the sensory system associated with our senses. So please let me take that again. The somatosensory input is the part of the sensory system associated with our senses. So it controls the parietal lobe controls our sense of touch, pain and pressure, taste, temperature, and it is also responsible for perception of joints and body positioning. So how we position our body is all by the parietal lobe, and it's the parietal lobe is also associated with language interpretation. So interpretation of language. So that is all about the parietal lobe. There are others, but these are the important ones that we'll be considering. So now the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe is the middle part of the cerebrum. So please let's not get it confused. The parietal lobe is the upper middle part of the cerebrum, and the temporal lobe is the middle part of the cerebrum. So the temporal lobe is concerned with auditory functioning or auditory information. Auditory information in the sense that it is responsible for a sense of hearing. So everything that we hear, it is the temporal lobe that is responsible for that. The temporal lobe is also responsible for our short-term memory. Our short-term memory. It is also responsible for our sense of smell. How we smell things, and then we know that this is a foul smell or this has a sweet scent. It is the temporal lobe that helps us with that. And the temporal lobe is also responsible for expression of emotions, also through interconnection with the limbic system. Since the limbic system is the center for strong emotions, it helps the temporal lobe in expression of our emotions, being it fear, excitedness, being it depression, being it irritability, being it anger. It helps us in expressing it. So the last part of the lobe that we need to consider is the occipital lobe. So the occipital lobe is the primary area of visual reception and interpretation. So let me take that again. The occipital lobe is the backside of the cerebrum or the backside of the hemisphere, and it is the primary area of visual reception and interpretation. Simply put, it is responsible for vision. So how we see things, we are able to process things through sight. It is the occipital lobe that helps us with the vision. So that is all for today. Thank you very much for your attention. I know today has been very, very educative learning about these things. So please, in our next video, we are going to talk about the diencephalon, which is the second part of the forebrain. So please stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Meet you in the next series.